What's up, everyone? Imagine discovering a suitcase on the side of the road, breaking it open, and finding the body of a child sealed inside with concrete. That nightmare became reality for a truck driver in 1988, kicking off a mystery that would take over 3 decades to solve. Before we dive into today's chilling cases, do me a solid, smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit subscribe so you never miss a case. Your support keeps these forgotten stories alive. Let's get into it. In recent years, a surge in the use of genealogy databases has led to breakthroughs in cases from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Long-forgotten victims and their families are finally given the justice they've been awaiting for decades. But sometimes there are simply too many threads and not enough solid evidence in a case to allow the police to find answers. Sometimes an eyewitness is required to put that missing puzzle piece into place. Join us for today's episode as we look at 3 calls that finally solved cold cases. On December 21, 1988, a truck driver had his attention grabbed by a visible television console unit sitting off to the side of the road while cruising along Duncan Bridge Road in Millwood, Georgia. Curious, the driver pulled over in order to inspect the furniture, where he discovered a black suitcase stored inside it. He pulled it out to find that it was heavy and sloppily sealed with cement. Upon breaking it open, he was shocked to discover a gym bag containing the decomposing body of a little girl. The driver returned to the cab and contacted law enforcement, who soon arrived on the scene. The girl was established as being a black female around the age of 3. She was around 2 feet 9 inches tall and weighed approximately 30 pounds. She had been dead for 4 to 8 weeks. Although there were no obvious signs of murder and that she did not bear any stab or gunshot wounds, her death was ruled a homicide. Since she had no identity, investigators dubbed her Christmas Doe, as her body was recovered just 4 days before the holiday. In the following days, the police began to canvass the nearby neighborhoods, hoping to find Christmas Doe's name. Unfortunately, though, their efforts were fruitless. Missing persons databases were scoured and families interviewed, but still Jane Doe remained nameless. Several public appeals were made for information in her case, but no useful leads came from these. For over 30 years, the little girl's case lay dormant. In 2019, some movement was made when investigators turned to Othram Incorporated, the genealogy testing company, to help with the investigation. They then learned that Jane Doe likely hailed from Albany, Georgia. Several years later, in 2022, a local news channel in the area aired a news segment about Christmas Doe, which prompted an unnamed viewer to contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The viewer told the GBI that she recognized the girl's image from when she herself was a child. She gave them the name Kenyatta Odom, who was her second cousin. The viewer was later identified as Teresa Ray. The GBI subsequently investigated the lead to discover that the viewer was right. Christmas Doe was indeed Kenyatta Odom, who vanished from Albany, Georgia when she was just 5 years old. Now armed with Kenyatta's name, investigators set to work tracing her family. On November 1, 2023, her mother, 53-year-old Evelyn Odom, and her mother's former boyfriend, 61-year-old Ulysses Sanders, were indicted on charges of felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, aggravated battery, concealing the death of Kenyatta, and conspiring to conceal her death. The pair were arrested 8 days later on November 9. According to the indictments, the former couple submerged Kenyatta in hot water, severely disfiguring her legs and feet, which led to her death. They then put her body in the gym bag in the suitcase before adding concrete and concealing the suitcase in the TV console in the woods at the edge of the road where it was later found. Notably, Teresa Ray told investigators that she was told as a child that she no longer saw Kenyatta because the 5-year-old had been sent to live with her father. She stated that she never really believed that story. In August of 2025, Sanders pled guilty to concealing material facts and concealing the death of another person, having been reportedly offered a plea deal several months earlier in June. Sanders was denied bond and agreed to testify against Odom at her trial. Odom's trial began several days later on August 11. The prosecution alleged that Kenyatta had been submerged in boiling water as punishment for soiling herself and claimed that Odom resented her daughter because she was the product of a rape. Additionally, Kenyatta had physical difficulties which made her more difficult to care for. The prosecution added that Sanders reportedly wanted to call 911 to help Kenyatta following the boiling water incident, but Odom discouraged him. The 5-year-old was placed on her bed and died between 4 and 5 days later. The pair then concealed her body. During Odom's trial, the family members of both her and Sanders testified, including Kenyatta's cousin, Teresa Ray. She told the court that she had never seen the girl again after she was sent to live with her father, and she never appeared at any family get-togethers. Other family members recalled that Kenyatta often looked malnourished and was very reserved. They added that after she disappeared, Odom and Sanders would tell all sorts of stories about where she was and what she was getting up to. Sanders' niece recalled, she didn't speak too much. She appeared to be fragile. Her face was sunken in. She was just very quiet. Sanders' sister, meanwhile, stated, every time she came over, there was always something wrong with her. She always had a bruise on her, like someone hit her in the head or something. She was always hungry, and I couldn't understand that. She added that the little girl walked with a limp. Sanders' testimony was perhaps the most damning, as he was a witness to much of the abuse Odom doled out. On August 27, 2025, Odom was found guilty of felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, conspiracy to commit a crime, and concealing the death of another. She faces the possibility of life in prison. But at this time, she has not been sentenced, and the case is ongoing. 15-year-old Lori Nesson was last seen on September 27, 1974, when she left a party on Harding Road. She never came home that night, and her parents never saw her again. Just 13 hours later, on September 28, her nude body was discovered in a roadside ditch on Rose Hill in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, around 5 miles from where she'd vanished. Her clothes were scattered around the area, and the coroner concluded that her cause of death was asphyxia of undetermined origin. Tragically, this determination meant that the case was not initially labeled a homicide, although her family firmly believed that Lori had been murdered. Her sister, Toni Hastings, told 10WBNS in 2020, a 92-pound, 15-year-old girl does not lie down on the side of the road naked and die on her own. Toni recalled that after her sister's demise, everything changed in her life. Everyone was shaken up and scarred by what had happened to Lori, and things only grew worse when another teen girl vanished in nearby Whitehall, Ohio in 1975. 17-year-old Karen Adams was last seen leaving the home she shared with her family. She told her parents she was going to visit a friend when in reality she was going to meet up with her boyfriend at a local supermarket, but Karen never made it to the meeting. Her body was found the next day in a ditch. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Karen's boyfriend was considered a suspect initially, but he was questioned and released without charge. Her father offered a reward for information leading to a conviction in her case, but the money went unclaimed. Both Karen's and Lori's cases went unsolved for decades. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Karen's case was eventually revisited in 2011, likely because it was a confirmed homicide. Her underwear had been carefully stored away for future testing, and investigators felt forensic technology was far enough along that it would be worth submitting. They were right. Semen from 2 separate males was recovered from the clothing. A match was found for one of the profiles. The match was made to 71-year-old Robert Meyer, a resident of Cincinnati. He had a lengthy criminal history dating back to 1963, when he had murdered a man with a hammer during a robbery. He spent just a decade in jail for the crime, during which time he met Charles Weber, a fellow inmate who was just as disturbed as he was. Meyer and Weber hit it off immediately, and following their release from prison, they moved in together. They stayed on the same street as Karen in the early 1970s. In 1976, the pair kidnapped and raped at least 2 women in Ohio and were sentenced to further stints in jail. Weber eventually died behind bars in his 50s, but Meyer was released after 23 years. When he was approached by investigators in relation to Karen's case, he had been living for a decade as a free man. He initially denied knowing Karen and denied involvement in her murder, but ultimately pled guilty. When asked about a motive, Meyer didn't give one, simply stating that it was just what he did. Meyer was sentenced to 15 years to life. He passed away just 3 years into his sentence. Although Karen's case was officially solved, it would take some time before Lori's family finally got answers when her case was reopened in 2019. A patrol officer, not a detective, was the first one to start re-examining the case after learning about it. The officer had a 15-year-old daughter himself and felt compelled to find some semblance of justice for Lori and her family. Looking through her autopsy photos, he noticed that Lori had suffered a cut on her lip and other small injuries that would indicate foul play. He asked the coroner to review her case, which led to it being relabeled as a homicide. The officer, Craig Bradford, subsequently reached out to Tony. She remembered, the first thing he said was, "I'm not trying to open an old wound, but I need to talk to you about your sister," and I proceeded to say to him, "You can't open something that's never been closed." The most interesting piece of information, however, came from a news channel viewer later that year. News channel WBNS 10 TV aired a segment on the case, which caught the attention of an unnamed viewer who tipped the police off that Lori's case bore a striking resemblance to that of Karen Adams. Investigators looked into Karen's case to see the similarities for themselves. They then had Lori's clothing sent for DNA testing. Since police didn't have a sample of Weber's DNA, they asked his son for a cheek swab, which he agreed to. The results showed that both Meyer and Weber were responsible for Lori's murder. Although both men are dead, Lori's family finally have answers. Reynoldsburg police have asked other police agencies in Ohio to review their cold cases from 1974 to 1977, as they believe Meyer and Weber are responsible for far more crimes than they were ever convicted of during their lifetimes. On November 12, 1966, 23-year-old railroad worker Paul Snider kissed his wife Karen goodbye, as well as the couple's newborn baby girl. He had no idea it would be the last time he would ever see his 18-year-old wife alive. Later in the day, Paul called Karen while he was still at work. Though she didn't answer the phone, he was not immediately alarmed. She was likely taking a nap or caring for their infant daughter at the time. But a feeling of anxiousness began to settle in his chest when his parents, who lived nearby, dropped by to check on her, only to find that no one was home. They notified Paul, and he decided to leave his shift early to go home and check on Karen and the baby. Paul arrived at the couple's home at around 11 p.m. Their baby girl was thankfully safe in her crib, but when he climbed the stairs to the couple's bedroom, he was met with a horrifying sight. Karen was dead in a pool of blood. She had been viciously stabbed over 120 times. Police arrived on the scene a short time later, cordoning off the house and getting to work. A trail of blood evidence indicated that Karen had been attacked in the living room and chased up the stairs to the bedroom. Injuries to her hands and arms showed that she had tried to fight off her assailant, and her time of death was estimated to be sometime between 4 and 6 p.m. that day. Investigators concluded that she had been stabbed to death using a stiletto knife, although the murder weapon was never recovered. There were numerous other pieces of evidence inside the building, including a broken window in the basement, a trail of blood leading to the front door, which was unlocked when Paul returned home from work, and $50 was missing from Karen's purse. Oddly, a living room table lamp had also vanished. Adding to the strangeness of the crime scene was that a pile of bloody clothing was found in the bathroom tub. The home phone had been ripped off the wall, and a light bulb that had been unscrewed from above the stairs was recovered in the bedroom, blood-stained. Investigators theorized that the basement window was broken in an attempt to make the incident look like a break-in. They also suggested that the killer had cleaned blood off himself using the clothing that had been dumped in the bathtub. Naturally, Paul Snider was considered the first person of interest in the case. However, he was ruled out of the investigation after the blood from the crime scene was analyzed. It revealed that there were two blood types present. Type O, which belonged to Karen, and Type A, which belonged to her attacker and was not a match for Paul. After he was dismissed as a suspect, another person of interest came to the police's attention. He was not publicly named at the time, but he reportedly had a deep cut on his hand following the murder, for which he required stitches at the hospital. Furthermore, his blood type was a match to that of Karen's assailant. Even more incriminating was the fact that he was familiar with the family and had been inside their home before. Both the man and his wife were questioned by police. He claimed that he was out at a pub on the night of the murder and added that his injury was the result of having tripped over a tree stump while intoxicated. He stated that because he had problems with alcohol, he was used to being injured in such a way. His wife confirmed the story, noting that he'd come home very late and was very drunk at the time. She noticed his injury, but thought nothing of it due to his history of alcoholism. The couple were ultimately let go because there wasn't enough evidence to connect the man to the murder. The police at the time noted that a fingerprint was discovered at the scene, but it had no distinguishing characteristics and thus could not be linked to any one person. Hair was also recovered, but it was a match for Karen. Due to a lack of forensic technology, the case grew cold. For decades, Karen's case remained dormant. Then one day in December 2022, 29-year-old Kevin Seeley, a resident of Calumet City, called the police to inquire about its progress. He told them that his grandmother had talked about the case all throughout his life, and he'd become curious about whether it was ever solved. While Kevin didn't have any new information for investigators, his interest was enough to prompt a reopening of Karen's case. Over the next 18 months, Calumet City detectives re-examined the case, combing over old files, retesting evidence, and re-interviewing witnesses. Some of the evidence sent for testing included clothing and a bed sheet from which the Illinois State Crime Lab was able to pull a DNA profile. In March of 2023, investigators obtained a search warrant in Missouri and collected a DNA sample from the suspect, who had now been identified as 79-year-old James Barbier. He is the same man that investigators spoke with back in 1966 and had been their prime suspect back then. Barbier lived in Gary, Indiana at the time and worked alongside Paul Snider. He was considered a family friend and had visited their home before. Barbier's wife revealed that on the night of Karen's murder, he'd come home drunk and injured, but also appeared nervous. She remembered that he'd stripped down and put his clothing in the washing machine. Chillingly, he had been a pallbearer at Karen's funeral. Paula Lane, Paul and Karen's daughter, told news outlets of her relief that the mystery was finally solved. She remembered, "My father's side had always said, 'This is the man.' Karen's brother is also still alive and is glad to see that justice is finally being served." Paul, meanwhile, remarried following Karen's passing. He died from a heart attack in 1989, aged just 45. The case is still ongoing. And there you have the facts. Before you go, do me one last favor. Leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions. Hit that like button if this video kept you on the edge of your seat, and subscribe to ColdcaseYT-jay so you never miss another cold case breakdown. Your support means everything and helps bring these forgotten stories back into the light. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.